All right, Luisa, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to hear more about you and how you've got into woodworking and more about your craft. So if you don't mind, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thanks for having me on. So I was born in South America, Colombia, and then moved up to Chicago, spent a lot of time there, moved to LA, spent a lot of time there. And while I was in LA, more specifically Long Beach, we bought a house and started working on that house. I was like, oh, I can do floors and I can do trim and baseboards, and um, sort of got started on that journey. And then it turns out that whatever was supposed to take one weekend was taking 2 months. Uh, so then all of a sudden I was like, why am I having such a hard time troubleshooting? YouTube is not giving me the tools that I need. Um, so then I decided to take intro to woodworking at the local community college, which was Cerritos college. And then a termite bit me while I was in class, and I've not been able to put down the wood. And it sort of focused on furniture making. So I was like, forget fixing this house. I want to make furniture now.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
And I love that your ambition, like right off the bat, you're going to take on a house. Like,
right. Just, simple project, no big deal.
You're like, I got this.
Finished carpentry. What could go wrong?
I love it. I love it. So what do you think, like, was there like a particular moment whenever, I guess maybe before you went to school, that you were like, okay, this is it? Like you said, like doing your house and everything kind of led to that. Was it just like a general feeling, like over time you're like, yes, this is absolutely me? Or was it like a kind of like a light switch moment?
Well, I've always been into fixing things up, and I've always been a pretty good troubleshooter. So if there's a problem to solve, my mind is all in. I have like I don't want to say pretty severe, but I'm definitely very ADHD, like diagnosed, have to go through. So things like manual and exciting and new things get light my brain up, especially if there's a problem. So before woodworking, I was in eyewear for probably 13 years. And I started in the front of the house, sort of selling glasses, and then moved to the back to actually making lenses. And I had an easier time dealing with machines and like troubleshooting problems with frames and with lenses. So I've always been into kind of like fixing things. And I did that for a long time. And then when I went into the class, and my brain was just engaged and I couldn't put it down and I couldn't get enough of it. Because at some point, I think because of the ADHD, eventually I'm like, I'm so bored. I don't want to do this anymore. Like I've done enough of it. My brain is no longer engaged. But with woodworking, that never happened. And because there's so much stuff to do. It's endless. There's finished carpentry, there's furniture, there's cabinet making. I can go on and on and on about all the little things you can learn. So my brain is just on and engaged and just wants to do it. So I don't know that there was one specific moment. It was just like time after time, I was just hungry and hungrier for more information.
Gotcha. And that's awesome.
And just more time in the shop. Yeah.
Very cool. And you mentioned that you built like eyewear and you're wearing like the most amazing pair of glasses right now, which
thank you.
That doesn't surprise me. And that's kind of just on a personal note. I love like eyeglasses and sunglasses. So that's really cool.
I do too. I'm still fascinated by eyewear design and by the like technical things about optical lenses and coatings and things like that, but it didn't grab me. It still grabbed me, and I was in there for way longer than I would have been had I been like in an office. But it didn't grab me like wood did.
Very
wood
interesting.
Definitely takes the cake. Yeah.
Well, I love that, and it's interesting to go from something that's probably like a pretty colorful, really expressive craft, making eyewear, and then to go to wood. It's a totally different medium, and so that kind of like segues into perfectly my next question. I have got to hear about your lavender workbench, and
Oh
I can
yeah.
see it behind you. That is freaking amazing. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, there she
Let's
is.
hear about it.
So it started with a well, the first woodworking tool I ever bought was a vise because I needed to finish my cutting board, the first thing I ever made in class. So I needed to finish my cutting board, but I was having a really hard time holding on to the cutting board while I sanded and getting the curves because I picked a really like curved shape. So I was like, well, I need to buy a vise. So, went on Craigslist, bought a vise, and I had that vise like, in the shop for a long time. And then eventually I'm like, okay, I'm going to restore that vise because it's all rusted. It's not attached to anything. So I restored the vise and I made it as nice and as pretty as I could make it. And I painted it pink. And then I was like, well, now I need to sort of build a workbench around it. Plus, I needed a workbench. So that's kind of how the lavender workbench, well, lavender, I think it's called Victorian Rose is the color. If if you're
Oh, I
interested,
like
you
it.
can get it at your big box store probably.
No, that's awesome. And what a great first project too, to build a workbench. A lot of people that are just getting into woodworking or wanting to learn a lot of different like techniques in one project tend to go for the workbench. And so I love
I
that
guess
you,
the way I
oh no, go
answered
ahead.
that was misleading. The tool was my first tool, but the workbench came projects and projects and projects later. I had the vise for I think 3 years before I started drawing the bench. Yeah. So just want to clarify, I didn't just jump into making a workbench. That would have been wild. Very
I don't
ambitious.
know. You're going for a house there. So I mean a
Oh, that's
workbench,
true. Yeah.
That's
You're right.
amazing. That's so cool though. And I love the story behind the vice. I love how you kind of like made things your own. That was one thing in woodworking that is kind of difficult to do, is to be really expressive. And so it's always interesting to see how people put their own creative spin on things. So I really like the way, I've never seen a Victorian rose, workshop set. So you're definitely one of a kind, and I really love it. And my husband's probably like, oh God, now she's gonna have all these things in her
Paint
head.
everything Victorian Rose. I say do it.
It's a very calming
Yeah.
color. So well, that
Another
is
thing
awesome.
that pushed me was I visited Daryl Part's shop. I'm Seattle based now, and he was sort of doing a makeover in his shop where he was painting everything. And he's like, I've been doing classes for so long and making furniture for so long. I never took the time to sort of make the shop how I wanted it to look. And I was like, well, I'm building my shop up now. I could just do it because it's either applying a finish on it or paint it however I want. So then the entire shop now is Victorian Rose. Like everywhere you look, all the tools are part of the family.
I love that. And that's something I've been thinking a lot about lately as far as like my space. Like I have a lot of white walls and things back here, and you think, oh, blank space, like lots of room for creativity, but I found it was just like it's too empty. So did I cut out?
No.
Oh, good. um no, I was saying but I guess hearing your story and kind of what I've been thinking about personally really ties into the idea of like having to make our own space, which is something that happens. I want this project to be for people to feel comfortable sharing their spaces or creating their own. So it's wonderful to hear someone like have have kind of a different approach to, like it's like you just show up and you're like, all right, I'm here. Whereas a lot of people tend to ask for permission. And not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily. If you have a mentor, that's one thing. But I really love your style and your approach. And yes, you are like the epitome of making space, truly, like for us here. So this is really cool.
Yeah.
So what are you working
Sometimes
on
I
current?
worry
Oh no,
that
go
I
ahead.
take too much. Oh, no, it's okay. Sometimes I worry that I take up too much space because I'm very introverted and kind of a loner. But if I'm in a social setting, I'm not. I mean, what is that called? I code switch with my personality depending on the setting. I mostly like to stay kind of to myself, but if I'm in a class or if I'm in a social setting, then I'm taking up room, I'm asking questions, I'm in there, right? And sometimes I try to self-regulate and be like, you don't have to take up that much space, but then I look around me and I see the other people that are taking up the most space, and I'm like, okay, me taking up all the space maybe will get other people used to more people coming in and taking space that don't normally take that space. So I'm like, forget it. I'm just going to, I almost just cursed. I'll keep it PG. I'm like, forget it. I will just take up this space and make more room for other people that don't normally belong, not belong, but aren't usually seen in this space.
No, absolutely. And so not are you only like fulfilling your own like personal purpose, but you're setting an example, and maybe there's somebody out there that says, oh, there's room for me, whereas before they wouldn't
Completely.
have thought, there was a place for them at all. So
Right. I know, yeah. I want the children in the back to see that they belong wherever they want to be. And if you're shy or if you're outgoing or if you're somewhere in the middle, it doesn't matter. You still belong there and you still deserve the room that, you want.
that's the wonderful thing about woodworking, and I think craft in general is it's kind of a very like neutral space for people to be able to come in and be themselves and express themselves. And it's something that really connects us all. So to be in especially woodworking, which is, I guess, historically, white male. That's what people think of whenever they think of,
Yeah.
traditional woodworkers. So being able to even just see one other person, you may not even look like them, but to see somebody that is different, might give someone kind of at least the thought process to, hey, maybe this is something I could do, instead of talking themselves out of it. And craft it is a good place for us to be able to take up space and to create community, and also I think it's a good place to kind of have some of these like more in-depth conversations and like some of the harder topics that some of us like in Pentachosal, like covering things like race and gender and things like that. Whereas before it was like, all right, just stick to woodworking or whatever. Again, it's almost like you can't explain and put a value on like being able to look and see yourself in someone, doing something that you want to do.
Right.
It really is a confidence booster, especially for woodworking, being heavily introverted. I mean, we are, social people. Obviously, we like met on social media, but I think to be a woodworker, you have to be used to spending a lot of time alone. That's just how it works.
Right.
So I think it's even more important to be yourself and take up that space, because the types of personalities that might generally be initially attracted to woodworking might, be more introverted than even, we are. So I might need a little
Right.
extra coaxing. So I say keep going. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Well, yeah, and things like gender are so individual, and the way that we all relate to art and furniture and trades and all of that. Like we've seen a million chairs and a million tables. I want to see somebody's point of view when you're making it, and that has nothing to do with, you know, gender or where you're from. I mean, it will influence what you're doing probably, but then that's what I want to see.
Sure.
So I want to hear different voices. I don't want to see the same thing over and over. Let's see what everybody has to offer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, the only way that I feel like new ideas and new styles are going to come about is if we're able to see stuff that's different, stuff that people, put their own little twist on, or something that's completely new and original and out there, and makes people think a little bit differently about a chair or a table, or the way they approach furniture in general. So really interesting, because furniture is a very, complicated, shall I say, like, subspecies of woodworking. So what, going into furniture, what is your passion there? Is it chairs? Is it tables? Is it kind of everything?
So it is everything. However, this year I've really been focused on chairs, and when I was able to be in school, because pandemic times, it was easier because you could go take a class, learn about it. But now, and sort of take risks about, whatever, you just design a chair and you make it, and whatever it ends up being, it ends up being. But since I've had more time at home, I've just been like reading, looking at videos and researching, and so I just want to, I feel like I'm gearing up to start making chairs. So I'm trying to consume and absorb everything I can before I sort of launch myself up into chair making, because it is a wild beast. So I think going forward, it's probably going to be chairs, but I love it all.
That's awesome. Yes, chair. That doesn't surprise me for you to take on chairs. They're such, like, probably the most complicated piece of furniture, and I love hearing that you're kind of researching and studying. And I'll have to look and see what books we have here. There's a couple that I can't think of off the top of my head that I could probably recommend. But yeah, it takes a lot of studying, and I think that's the beautiful thing about chair making. Is I even like watch these masters on Instagram, and seeing how open some of them are about mistakes they've made or the way they do things, and trial and error to even get to that point. It's a special process, chair making.
Yes.
So yes.
Yeah,
Is there
I've just started diving into these, some of the Instagram makers, but that sort of started 10 years ago on YouTube. They didn't start 10 years ago. They started way before that, but the record of it started about 10 years ago. So yeah, I've also recently just dove into that and, started following them on Instagram and seeing everything they do. And they are so generous with everything that they share. It's awesome.
Yes, absolutely. Is there a particular style of chair that you're thinking about going for first?
Well, I signed up for a class at Port Townsend it's called a West Coast Windsor chair. So we're going to start with Windsor chairs. I did make a maquette recently of the chair because I went on woodworking pilgrimage of the Bay Area, and nice. Two makers that were making a lot of maquettes were Trip Espinay and Michael Cullen. And I was just so amazed by these like teeny designs that are such a good showcase of your work if you're going into a meeting, if you're meeting with clients or whatever, that I was like, okay, let me start with maquettes. So I made a little tiny chair maquette, and then now I want the real deal. I want to make something big. So the next thing is to go up to Port Townsend and do this Windsor chair, West Coast Windsor chair.
That's awesome. Yes, I love like the little teeny little mock-ups, and yeah, it's also
good.
Oh man, and I feel like it shows a whole different level of skill, like them being so small, and you're doing like the joinery and like showing, like it so difficult in itself.
And you're dealing with toothpicks for towels. And you're like, I have to be so much more careful with this because the machines are not like, you're just hand tools almost all the way through. And a lot of sanding because the machines are just so enormous. There's no way that you can make these cuts and be, completely safe about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a couple of millimeters away from that blade. There's no way. So it's just hand tools, a lot of hand tools.
Yes, a lot of like fine finger work, I would imagine, especially like a Windsor style chair. That's awesome. Well, that's really cool. And Port Townsend's a great school. They've I kind of check out and see what classes they're offering. They always have a pretty diverse array of classes and instructors, which I
Yes,
really like.
completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I just took a class there with Jenna Goldberg about bandsaw boxes and embellishments. Oh, it was amazing.
oh, neat.
Such a
Too
fun,
cool.
creative class.
Too cool. Well, how long have you been living in the Seattle area?
I've been in the Seattle area for 2+ years, you know, one normal year, one pandemic. So I feel like I've only been in Seattle really for a year.
Yeah, I'm still in 2020. I mean,
Right.
and like
Yes.
2022 is like right there. It's like
Very
I'm not quite prepared. So, um, well, speaking of kind of changes and impacts, what has been your most like impactful project to date, you think?
My most impactful project was probably my cabinet on a stand. I was at Cerritos taking a solid case goods class. And so we were making a nightstand, but I didn't want a nightstand. I wanted something bigger. So I made, you know, my nightstand sort of, and then put it on a stand. But in one of the shelves inside, I sort of graffitied the whole thing as kind of an ode or an homage to Chicago. So I just picked like emojis and other like classic or traditional Chicago imagery, like the Picasso monkey and I mean, this is kind of dark, but a clown for, I think it was John Wayne Gacy, and
Yeah.
you know, just different, you know, Chicago icons I threw in there. And it was the first time I sort of was like, furniture doesn't have to just look clean and traditional. You can do whatever you want with it. So since that project, I've just been like, I'm not gonna make this look like just whatever style of furniture I picked. It's gonna be that, and then I want to add my own thing to it. So whatever that is, whether, you know, something is painted, something is carved, something is burned, it's gonna be it's, you know, you're gonna know it's mine, not just another one of these.
I love that. It's like the furniture itself is the canvas. That's amazing. I really like
Right,
that
exactly.
viewpoint. And I love Chicago, so I've got to check out. Is the stand on your Instagram feed by
Yes, but I
chance?
need to put. I'm so lazy on Instagram. I need to be better at it. Because I don't have a picture of the like graffiti inside. It's just the stand. So I'll post more like close-ups and the different things I burned on there. So
Oh,
if you
too
want to check it out.
cool. No, that sounds really awesome. That sounds cool. And I kind of like some of the dark stuff too. And that's not something you typically see in woodworking. And the only other person that like I can really think of off the top of my head that really isn't afraid to go out there is Katie Hudnall. She actually just taught
Mm,
recently at Port Townsend and a huge inspiration. And I just love woodworkers that are, you know, like I said, are able to look at a piece of furniture and be like, all right, that's my canvas. And, you know,
yeah,
making wood into something it's not really like supposed to look like. I've always really enjoyed. So that's really
yeah.
cool. Well,
I
awesome.
actually toured Port Townsend while they were there teaching the class, and I got to see some of the stuff, and I loved their stuff because toys are a huge inspiration to me. I think they're, as an expression of art, are amazing. So I love her stuff. So cool.
Yes, yes. The toys, they were really, really cool. And
Yeah,
you know, you think, oh, it's just a toy, but the mechanics and everything that she was, you know, teaching,
exactly.
oh, just brilliant. So really,
Yeah.
really cool. So, well, what is something that has surprised you about your woodworking career so far?
The main thing that surprised me is that since I started leatherworking sort of by accident because I wanted to make my own tool roll for my chisels and things like that, it snowballed into a teeny tiny business. So woodworkers became my clients, which I did not expect. I expected just, you know,
Nothing
regular
wrong with
folks to
that.
be clients, and instead my clients are woodworkers. So that, I think that has been the biggest surprise, and also that I'm professionally leatherworking when I want to be professionally woodworking. But also I could go out there and try to get a job at a cabinet shop, no problem. I've just been more focused on building my own shop and doing the leather work to supplement that.
I love that, and I tend to ask people a lot, like, what are your other creative outlets? Because woodworking also lends itself to like learning and engaging so many other forms of craft, like leatherworking. That's so cool. I've got to check that out too. And hey, a lot of my clients are woodworkers as well. So
Oh, cool.
it's neat though. I think it makes your product or your service or whatever you're offering, it's what they want, how it needs to function, and so being made by someone who knows what they need, I think it makes it a little extra cooler. So that's really awesome. That is a surprise.
Yeah, and if I get an order, which I got once, an order for a tool roll for just 1/8-inch chisels, I had to pull out all my 1/8-inch chisels and try to work out what this was going to look like, because the body of a 1/8-inch chisel is wild, because the handle is going to be just as big as any other chisel, but then the iron is different. So yeah, so it's easier being a woodworker. And also I sew, so I feel like leatherworking is right in the middle. It's like woodworking, sewing, leatherworking just fits perfectly right in there.
There you go. Well, that's kind of how this project and these interviews started. I like woodworking and I like writing, so I started writing about woodworking.
Oh, very cool.
So yeah. Well, cool. Well, what are some opportunities for improvement in the craft and trades with regards to diversity that you've identified or would like to see?
Well, there's a lot. There is a lot. But I think the kind of the baseline or the easiest thing would be the people that occupy the most room in the space, and the people that have historically have occupied the most room have to be big allies, big advocates, starting with their language, the way that they treat people in that space, the way that they welcome people into that space. So it's kind of on their shoulders and on them to make sure that the space is diverse, that the space is comfortable and welcoming and safe for everyone. So I think as a baseline, just the language that we're using, and for, like I said, the people that occupy the most space have kind of got to take ownership of that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point that you have about, if you're taking up the most space, it does kind of come with great responsibility to not be like too cheesy about it. But if you're truly, wanting to make an impact and you're out there preaching about it and posting about it, like, the actions have to follow, the words, and that's really important, and to be intentional about it too. A lot of times I hear, oh, well, I can't find, and I'm like, well, did you look? I mean,
right.
It's like you said, it does tend to fall on the person, on them, for lack of a better term, to make the spaces welcoming and inclusive. That's a huge thing that a lot of the folks that I talk to say is just the feeling of being in the space, feeling welcome. Like you said, that starts with small things, like language, like being accepting, and having a just a more welcoming environment. And it's hard for people to again feel like they're welcome in a space where they don't see themselves. So unless you're intentional about saying, hey, you're welcome here,
right,
people aren't going to know. So very cool. Well, for you personally, where would you like to see yourself and your craft in the next few years?
I would like to have a shop full of chairs in 5 years that I'm working on. I also want to leave a few houses like total architecture. So kind of like, I'm not ambitious. I have very realistic goals. So I would like to leave a few houses that are just like fully furnished, finished carpentry, landscaping, the whole thing, just be, my vision. Obviously with the team, I'm not going to sit there and do the whole thing myself because it's not impossible, but that's just too much. I want to do other things too. So yeah, total architecture, like I said, maybe a few houses and then just making a lot of chairs. And I also see myself like sort of in a circus, like I'm going from flea market to flea market showing my stuff. Like I think that kind of fits my vibe and personality, so I would like to do that. Just take my little show on the road.
Very cool. Yeah. You and I should probably not take on a project together. We'd probably like try to build a castle or something with a water park coming out the side or something, I love
That
that.
sounds fun. Yeah,
I
that
know. I'm
sounds
like,
fun.
I hope my kids didn't hear me. Um, no, that's awesome. I like the idea about the houses and also just like with the chair making and things like that. It sounds like you're really focused on like technique, getting that in there, like really honing in on the details.
Yes.
For someone that likes to take on big picture projects, you also sound like you're pretty good at focusing in on those little things that make that big picture a little bit brighter. So that's really
Yeah,
interesting.
thank the flying spaghetti monster for school, because it really, I mean, with the plan of procedures, with the cut list, with all of that stuff that they make you do, if you're scattered like an ADHD person would be, you would never get anything done. You would get 80% of it done, but you would never finish it. So then when you have a checklist and when you have a plan of procedures and you know exactly where to go next, and you know that you have to invest that time and it's going to be downtime and it's going to be boring at the beginning, but eventually you're going to get to do what you like to do. I think in that sense, school was amazing. I mean, in a lot of ways, school was amazing, but that particular thing for me was huge.
Yeah, I think for some folks, like my husband, he has ADD, and I think school was really good for him because it showed him like the importance of the process and to really
Mm-hmm.
like fall in love with that. I think it's probably easy for a lot of folks. I know me because I'm just impatient to want to like skip over things, and that's where I think professional woodworking schools really play a heavy part in continuing like the education and also I think making the craft more accessible for everyone to learn in the different ways that we learn. That's been really interesting to see over the pandemic as like organizations have gone to virtual learning and then some have, stayed in person and it's just been interesting to see how people adapt. And I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed seeing like again like people reaching out to more diverse audiences, having
Yes.
more diverse topics in their conferences and lectures and things like that. I see this as a really good opportunity as for us to like get a good push of momentum forward. And I don't want to go back. There's no going back.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right. I know the remote learning also. I don't, because then the number one thing at school was absolutely safety, and I obviously you can see it and hear it, but when you're standing in front of a table saw and your nerves are going, but the more that you step in front of that table saw, you sort of calm down a little bit every time, and you gain your confidence, and you know how your body's supposed to move, and muscle memory and all of that, or a router, whatever. Pick your machine. It's, yeah, I mean, obviously we have to stay safe and 6 feet away and masked and vaccinated and all of that. However, like safety, man, how do you teach that
and
remotely?
then
Yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely right because you're fine until that table saw cuts on and then it's totally different,
Yeah.
then the stomach drops. um
Completely.
And you're right. There's nothing like getting in front of that huge machine and saying, all right, I'm going to do this, and gaining the confidence of making that first cut. And it's a very good point about safety. Virtually also, like, just retaining, and I hadn't really thought about, the muscle memory and things like that. I guess it'll be really important for people that are getting into woodworking and kind of taking those courses, like once they are able to kind of be in person, to again retain that information. And then also, a lot of people don't have bandsaws and things like that, or
Yeah.
access to shops. That's been a really unfortunate thing, as people have lost their workspaces, or because of distancing or whatever, or aren't
Yeah.
able to be there all day every day like they normally were. I know at the Charleston Woodworking School, they were like alternating, I think, days or time, or mornings and afternoons, where only certain people, and that's kind of normal, if you have a big class, that wouldn't be out of the ordinary, just to make sure everybody had time on the machines. But I personally couldn't, like, I would really struggle to plan around that. And that's
Yeah.
got to be challenging for students these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah, that's gonna suck. But I mean, hopefully we'll reach the other side of this at some point, as long as everybody's on board.
I know. And hopefully, we're creative people. We adapt and find our own way to do things. Like, maybe being forced to will help us come up with a better way of doing things,
Yeah.
So just because something's done the same way for forever doesn't mean, that we can't try new things.
Completely.
So, well, cool. Well, how can people see more of your work and also get in touch with you?
Sure. I mean, on Instagram, like I said, I have to be better at posting stuff, but yeah, I think Instagram is the #1 spot. So I think I'm under Lucha Designs. And yeah, if they want to reach out, they can send me a DM, or they can email me at luchadesigns13@gmail.com.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Luisa, thank you so much for joining us. It was absolute pleasure. I can't wait to
Thank you.
see the mansion you complete next week.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you for the confidence.
You got it. If there's anybody that's got it, you got it. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for talking to me.